we have an exciting announcement about the future of T1 Determined. We are beyond thrilled to announce that we are partnering with Project Insel Nation. Together, Project Insel Nation and T1 Determined will be constructing T1D backcountry adventures. This includes overnight hiking, camping, expeditions, and trips across the country, and with hopes of growing to across the world, a type 1 diabetes-specific community outreach and growth initiative. Please stay tuned for future announcements, as Project Insel Nation will be helming these expeditions and trips, and T1 Determined will be capturing the content to bring you high-quality podcasts and documentaries.
It's one thing to have to eat a lot of carbs, refuel, top up your glycogen stores, et cetera, in between, say a post race or post training, you want to take in, a gram per kilogram of body weight of carbs, after your exercise, and, some protein as well to sort of refuel your glycogen stores. And that can also prevent you from having hypoglycemia overnight after particularly difficult exercise, because your body overnight is going to be kind of sucking up that glucose to try to fill up your glycogen stores again. And but if you've already sort of topped it off right after exercise, you don't have as much risk of hypoglycemia overnight. So that can be really helpful. But then by the same token, you don't want to 2 hours before you go on a 2-hour run, eat 80 grams of carbs and take 8 units of insulin or whatever, and have so much insulin on board. So that's where it becomes challenging.
So the number one cause, I would say, of getting a sensor error while you're running is you're not hydrated enough. Right. I also saw this at Dexcom. I was working with a nurse that was working 12-hour shifts. And every time during her shift, her sensor would stop working. She'd get sensor errors and she was very upset. And I go, "What do you do for work?" She's like, "Nurse, I'm working." I was like, "So are you drinking when you're working?" She's like, "Gosh, no, Lauren, I can't drink when I work. Then I'd have to go to the bathroom." I'm like, "Well, that's why your sensor's not working." But she didn't want to be inconvenienced by having to go to the bathroom when she was, on the floor.
Welcome to the T1 Determined podcast, where we bridge the conversation of type 1 diabetes and endurance. I'm Joseph Anthony Marcello, a runner, a weightlifter, a mountaineer, an athlete. As someone living with T1D, I'm on a mission to uncover and share science-backed information that drives optimal performance and longevity. And as a storyteller, I'm here to explore and share incredible feats in T1D sports physiology. Let's tackle this together. Today, I am joined by two incredible leaders from the Diabetes Sports Project, Dr. Joe Henske and Lauren Adams. Dr. Henske is a clinical endocrinologist, researcher, and director of the diabetes program at the University of Arkansas Medical Sciences. A T1D athlete himself, having completed 15 marathons, he is currently leading a groundbreaking study on T1D athletes competing in the Boston Marathon. Joining him is Lauren Adams, a registered dietitian and certified diabetes care and education specialist with nearly 2 decades of experience blending clinical expertise with a passion for community advocacy, having completed 12 marathons herself as a T1D athlete. As ambassadors for the Diabetes Sports Project, Joe and Lauren work to empower the millions affected by diabetes, proving through elite competition that proper management and a positive outlook make any dream achievable. Whether in the clinic or on the race course, they are dedicated to ensuring that a diagnosis is never a finish line, but a starting block for excellence. In this episode, we dive into the intersection of high-level athletics and diabetes technology. We discuss Dr. Henske's latest research on marathoners, Lauren's insight on nutritional victory, and how they are both working to provide the roadmap for the next generation of T1D athletes to perform at the highest level of sport. As we build this podcast from the ground up, your support is crucial for our continued growth. Wherever you're listening, please share this episode and others with anyone you think might benefit. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and X at T1D_endurance, on Facebook at T1 Determined, and visit our website, t1determined.net. Before we dive in, I am not a medical doctor. The topics discussed and the recommendations shared by myself and our guests are personal experiences and not medical prescriptions. Always consult your healthcare team and medical professionals before making any changes to your daily routines, management, or therapies. And now, my conversation with Dr. Joe Henske and Lauren Adams of Diabetes Sports Project. Lauren and Joe, thank you very much for joining me today. What you both are doing in the realm of diet with type 1 diabetes, science with type 1 diabetes, and then athleticism with type 1 diabetes. I think you both, between the Diabetes Sports Project, your research, and then your athletic pursuits, you're becoming the bridge. But I see both of you as the bridge in different realms and aspects of type 1 diabetes to that science and relating it to athletic performance. So first off, I'd like to say thank you both for joining me today. And if you want to give a quick introduction, starting with you, Lauren, and then you, Joe, kind of about you yourself, your type 1 diabetes, just a quick, maybe 2-minute encompassing statement of what you do too.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having us, first off. I'm Lauren Adams. I grew up in the California Bay Area. I was diagnosed in 1992. I was 11 years old. I'm 45 now. I've run 12 marathons, 3 Bostons. I'm running another Boston here in a month. And, ran cross country in college. I studied nutrition. I became a registered dietitian and then a certified diabetes educator. I've worked in adult endocrinology and pediatric endocrinology. Then I worked in industry. I worked at Dexcom for 5 years. I managed a clinical team there. And then I worked at Tandem Diabetes Care, where I worked in clinical and then in sales. Now I'm doing rare disease pharma, which is also really interesting. So I kind of jumped out of diabetes a little bit. But I am keeping my toes in the water of diabetes still, so to speak, with, I volunteer at diabetes camps in the summer. I direct a wilderness camp
Awesome.
here in Idaho. I live in Boise, Idaho. And then with Diabetes Sports Project, I've been involved with them since, 2018. Before that, with Team Novo Nordisk. And at Diabetes Sports Project, I am the director of education and social media. And then I'm also kind of the kind of group leader for the Boston project. So we're going on our 3rd year of having people with type 1 qualify and race at Boston. And I just love it. I love supporting people with diabetes in whatever realm they're in. But my biggest goal, I think, is I want to see as many people with type 1 be active for their whole lives, right? So I don't plan on slowing down. I'm getting older, but I'm getting faster, and it's really, really fun.
That's really awesome. Clearly, you're doing a lot. And I think the big mission that it seems like you have is advocating while being active with type 1 diabetes helps your type 1 diabetes and helps your management and helps you just live a full, fulfilled lifestyle. So thank you for doing all that you do. And Joe, how about, I know you do probably equally as much. It's quite
More,
amazing.
I would say.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I appreciate being here as well. I mean, it's funny how type 1 diabetes is a disease that it's part of who you are. It doesn't define you as a person, but it's part of who you are. And it really, you become so passionate about it. I mean, I see so many people with type 1 diabetes who, they get involved with it. They want to work in a company that has to do with type 1 diabetes. They want to do research. They want to be a physician, or they want to, keep it as part of their life. And I think that's so great. In terms of my story, I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, like Lauren, at a pretty young age. I was 14, and I'm 48 now, so I've been living for 34 years with type 1 diabetes. And again, at first, it's not what I wanted to do. I was like the average 14-year-old. I didn't want to think about diabetes at all. I wanted it to be just a little compartment of my life. And then as I went on, I realized it was really a gift to have type 1 diabetes. For someone like me who wanted to be involved in science and medicine, me having diabetes, I knew I could take that information, that lived experience, and then share it with others, and also, help others manage their diabetes. So I went on to medical school. and eventually endocrinology fellowship. And it was just a really natural fit for me to specialize in type 1 diabetes. All throughout that time, I was really interested in running, and I was interested in athletics and really all sports. But eventually, running was something that you could do anytime, anywhere, with just yourself, and you had to. And it's a great thing for managing blood sugars, but also just your mental health, your well-being, and all these kind of things. And so running has always been a big part of things. And then once I got into academics, and once I got into out into practice, I found ways to combine all of these things together. Living with diabetes as an individual, exercise, and running, and being a physician and helping other people take care of their own diabetes. So I remember when I gave a talk at the Endocrine Society meeting the other year, it just hit me all at once. Like, this is everything. This is like my life. This is my life's purpose, is to help others live with type 1 diabetes and perform exercise to the best of their abilities. For my exercise story, I was never a great runner. Would see people who were much faster, had much more natural ability, but I stuck with it, and I think that's another story about diabetes, is just sticking with it. And so I ran in high school, I ran in college, and then I started running marathons afterwards, and I was okay, but again, just like Lauren, I'm still getting better. I'm 48 years old. I ran the Chicago Marathon in 2024 as my fastest marathon ever, and had beaten my previous time by about 20 minutes. And I think it just, the more you learn, the more you understand, the more you reflect on what's working and what's not in diabetes management and in athletic performance, the better you can get. And like Lauren said, it's amazing. There's no really limits on age, and I'm so excited that we have some people even in their 50s and 60s in our group who are going to be running in the Boston Marathon, and so this is just a lot of fun for me.
It's really amazing from a storytelling perspective to kind of just see how encompassing it is, because I mean, when I was first diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, doctors came into a room and said, "You got type 1 diabetes," and then they left, and I'm just like, "Oh, great." But I didn't know, and again, it says the more I live with this condition, the more I learn about it, and the more I'm optimized with it. So it's not saying it's getting easier, because it definitely doesn't get easier, especially as life goes on. But your point to knowledge is power. I think that's a huge key that listeners can especially take away. While Joe and Lauren, while both of you, Joe studying more so the pancreas, the function of the human body, and then Lauren kind of focusing on the whole metabolic system, at what point in your running careers did you think to yourself, hey, what I'm studying, what I'm working on, my career, what I'm doing now actually has direct effect to my blood sugar and the function of my human body while I'm running?
Yeah.
Was it a specific moment?
I mean, I think even before, getting into that, just this, like, what a transformation we've seen over the last 20 years with diabetes management with exercise. I remember I tell the story, like, when I was in high school and I would run a 5K. Who knows? It was either going to go great or it was going to go terrible. And we had no way of knowing essentially at the beginning of the race what was going to happen, because we didn't understand insulin on board. We didn't understand what was going on with our blood sugars. We didn't understand, all these things. If I felt bad, I ate a banana. Like, that was basically it. And if I felt good, I ate a banana, and that was my solution to everything. And we really didn't know. And I dropped out of races left and right. I would have a good race, and then I'd have a bad race, and a good race, and a bad race. And so, I mean, the time that changed everything for me, honestly, is CGM. Since we've had continuous glucose monitors, life is 100% different. And insulin pumps, came out, basically first, and insulin pumps were helpful, but at the time they were just another way to deliver insulin, and you still had a lot of challenges with that. But once CGMs came out, you could really reflect, and again, you could really review, and you could figure out, why is this happening? To what extent is it happening? Not just my blood sugar was fine in the morning, and then it was higher or lower at lunch or at dinner, but how long did it stay high? Why did it stay high? Did it go down and then up, or was it up the whole time? And so I think for me, and I became very passionate about CGM, at a very early stage in terms of we're going to use this for type 1, type 2, prediabetes, people who don't even have glucose issues. Now we're talking about CGM and performance. There's a couple studies recently about, using CGM and seeing what happens when you give it to high level athletes who don't have diabetes and what you see. So I think CGM has really been the biggest change in my life in terms of how we're able to successfully manage diabetes. And then automated insulin delivery systems now are just sort of an extension of that.
Mhm.
I would
What about
totally agree with everything Joe says. And I think the first time I qualified for Boston, I mean, we'd had our 2 boys in 2010 and 2012, and I think going through a pregnancy and managing in pregnancy, oh my gosh, the stakes were never so high to, like, have really tight, beautiful control, right? Because I wanted to have
Yeah,
these perfect, healthy babies. They're a handful, they're teenagers
awesome.
now, but, they're amazing, but I think that gave me so much confidence to then come back after I had the 2 boys and go, "I'm gonna do this big. I'm gonna qualify for Boston. I'm gonna hire a
Mhm.
coach." And I did that and it worked, and at the time, I think it was 2015, so I'm trying to remember. I think I actually had a receiver for the Dexcom. I think it was a G4 at the time, and I wore it in a band on my wrist so I could, like, see my numbers, like, there, and now we have other tools, like, I can get it on my Garmin, I can get it on an Apple Watch, I can even wear both watches if I wanted to see, on both. Sometimes, people even wear 2 sensors in a race just in case one starts to not work. And actually, Dr. Henske is going to be doing a study of us all at Boston, all of us type 1s that are running, and we're going to get the chance to wear 2 sensors. But I would take it a step further of like, yes, the sensor was the pivotal point of like, if I can see my numbers, I can know how to adjust things. I know how to tweak my nutrition to meet my needs just as an athlete, diabetes aside, right? We need that nutrition coming in to perform at our highest level. But I also need my blood sugar to be in this beautiful range, so I feel like when I'm racing that I don't have diabetes, right? Even though in my mind I'm thinking of all these things and I'm looking at everything, I just wanna be in target in that race. So I sent you some pictures of this, but, especially when I meet with like when I worked at Tandem and I was meeting with a lot of endocrinologists, they would wanna see my data. So I made, like, a handout where I put, like, all of my most recent races, like, on one sheet to show them what I did, and I also put on the back this, like, ultra trail race that we did, in August. It was in Colorado. It was like a 6-day stage race. It was 120 miles with, like, 20,000 feet of climbing. Um, but I think the next level is you take your CGM data and whatever automated system you're on, figuring out how to pull levers so that my goal is not just to have time and range during the race and feel great and feel in control in each moment that I know how to respond depending on what's happening to my glucose, but I want to have it where I don't have to interact very much at all with my system. I can just take in carbs as I'm going, and I've set that pump up so that it's just going to automate for me, with me, and keep me in range. So I feel really confident that I can do that now. And I really want to bring that knowledge to people and help them and help providers to guide their patients through this too.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, first off, I'd like to say when I was 2 months ago now, when I was climbing Kilimanjaro, I didn't try different companies, but I wore the Dexcom G6 sensor, the Dexcom G7 10-day sensor, and then the Dexcom G7 15-day sensor. And I was just a test trying myself. And they were kinda accurate. One was always accurate. So it always switched
Yeah.
which one was accurate, but it was kinda cool to see that one if one bugged out, like, actually, I think it was the 10-day sensor ended up failing on Summit Day, I still had the 15-day sensor and, the G6 sensor, and I was able to trust both of those, and it's also to me, I knew which one wasn't accurate based on how I felt. And it goes back to a huge point of CGMs are great to track. They bring the term trend, but it really, at the end of the day, is how you feel. To especially like you said, when you're running and when you're in performance, you want to not have to worry about that. You want to be at your peak performance, and that really truly goes back to the fact of how you feel while you're running. You want to be at that top level of feeling great. What Lauren, directed to you, what do you do before a race to kind of make sure your blood glucose is stable heading into one? Because I know like it can stay in range the entire race, but if it's fluctuating even before the race, that can prevent you being ready to run at your peak performance.
For sure. It's one of the hardest things about racing and something that I've had to work through over the years. And I would also say, I think age is your friend with this because I think as I've grown older, I've it's not that I care less, but like I'm not doing this to impress anybody else. I'm
Mhm.
purely doing this for me. It's all about me on race day. And I also like I think as a very competitive type A person, like I'm all about the time. I'm all about I've got my A goal, B goal, C goal for the day, and I am in it. But one of the things that I've learned that's really, really helped me is the more anxious I am on that start line, and Boston is a big one. You get off these school buses and you get to the start area and you've got all this time at the start area to, some people just get really super nervous. So my goal is I get to the start line with a friend and I can joke around and I can kind of keep in a really positive headspace because right when I start to get anxious, my blood sugar just goes through the roof, right? I even saw this once. I was pacing a friend at a race. This was when I lived in Florida, and we were out at this race. I wasn't even racing. I didn't have a race bib, nothing. And I'm standing on the start line, ready to cheer her on, and the gun goes off, and my blood sugar goes up. And I'm like, dang it, like, I'm not even racing. Like, calm down. But I was so excited for her that it affected my glucose.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll even like jog a little bit before to kind of, ease things in. I will adjust. Sometimes I'll even disconnect from my pump so that I don't get a bunch of automation before the race starts because that high from all of that anxiousness is almost like a false high. And the last thing you want to do is start a race with a bunch of insulin on board. I've even disconnected from my pump, I call it a ghost bolus, give a small little bolus so the automation thinks that there's like half unit on board or however much you want to give. And that it calms down and it's not going to overcorrect in the beginning.
Yeah.
So there's a whole lot
Especially
involved.
when it's a marathon and
Yeah,
even if you go low within the first couple miles, you still have 20 something miles to go.
Yeah.
So just to prevent
exactly.
the bouncing from the start.
It's so mental. It is so mental in that beginning part. Once I get going, like it's all gone. It's game on.
Yeah.
I'm
It's like once you're
focused.
in
It's
the
good.
rhythm. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, Joe, this phenomenon, and I don't know if it has any science backing, but it kind of relates to, and I want to commend CGMs because they are accurate and they're only getting better and they are absolutely amazing. But I know you've done some study and research to see that feelings and what we are feeling is more timely and accurate to the time, even if the CGM's a couple minutes behind, just our bodies can be a couple minutes ahead of that. Sometimes when I'm running, especially in a marathon, long distance, or even hiking, I know I'm about to crash before the CGM gets it, but I know I'm about to crash because I feel a massive sense of happiness. I don't know how to explain it. Even sometimes when I over bolus at dinner, I'm always happy like right after. And then I'm like, I catch myself and I'm like, usually I'm not this happy of a person. Oh no, I'm like, I'm about to crash. So I don't know if that dopamine release is me trying my body being like, go search for sugar. Or if that ends with me, but I know other people have some sort of like reaction to predict their crash. How, as a scientist and as a runner, how do you prepare for those crashes that may be ahead of the CGM?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a great point. It's just that with the number that you're getting is not your blood glucose, right? It's your interstitial fluid glucose. And there's a
Hmm.
big difference between the two, particularly when your blood sugars are changing quickly. Why do you feel good? I mean, obviously, you feel good with adrenaline. And sometimes as your blood sugars are getting low, you're feeling adrenaline, and adrenaline is kind of a positive feeling. The studies I think that you're referring to looked at lag time between blood glucose and CGM glucose, and I have looked at a lot of these things, and I've looked at different sensors. And again, this is one of the reasons we think about different sensors: is there one that's better than the other? For example, I thought for a while maybe this implanted sensor, the Eversense, maybe that's going to be better because it's actually underneath the skin, and maybe that gives it an advantage. And there was a time where I kind of compared multiple different sensors all at the same time to see. But all the sensors have fundamentally, there's a sensor coming out in the future that's actually implanted in the subclavian vein that is actually going to measure blood glucose. But for the most part,
Cool.
all the sensors kind of operate the same way. They all have a lag time of, 5, 10, 15 minutes. And the problem is when your blood sugars are changing so quickly, that can be very significant. In fact, yesterday I was remarking with a friend of mine. We were running together, and my blood sugar was dropping by 10 milligrams per deciliter per minute. So in 5 minutes, it dropped 50 points. And again, you're feeling one thing, and your sensor is saying another thing. It's because you're feeling what is already happening, and the sensor is lagging behind. So, if it says 120 with two arrows down, you're in trouble, right? Because essentially you're already, behind, and your actual glucose, if you did a finger stick at that time, would be much lower. And so you definitely have to be treating one step ahead. And this is the challenge of all automation and all systems, is that they're not thinking like a human brain should be thinking, and they can't consider all these things directly. And the insulin is too slow to react as your blood sugars are dropping and all these different kinds of things. And so, that's why, like when Lauren was talking about the preparation phase before exercise is really the critical, because this is where you need to use your brain. You need to think about how much insulin is going to be in my system, how much reduction in insulin am I really going to need in order to control my blood sugars during exercise. So I think that again, I think you'll show the reference for my paper, which basically divided exercise into 4 phases: prepare, perform, stabilize, and study. Preparation phase is in the 4-6 hours ahead of exercise. The performance phase is, of course, during the exercise. Stabilization is kind of in the 12 hours after exercise. And then the study period is meant to be reflecting on, is this exercise, was I able to control my blood sugars during this phase and this and that. So I think that just going back to it, I think that CGM has to be taken with a grain of salt. I think, again, just understanding that it's not blood glucose, it's an interstitial fluid glucose, and there's going to be a discrepancy there. And so you have to account for that. You have to proactively be taking in carbs. So if my blood sugar is 150 and going down, I'm not treating like I'm 150. I'm treating like I'm lower than that. And if you think about what does an arrow mean, an angled down arrow means 1 milligram per deciliter per minute of change. A one straight down means 2 milligrams per deciliter per minute of change, and 2 arrows is more than 3. And so if you have 2 arrows going down, that means that by definition, in 5 minutes, you're going to have a blood sugar at least 15 points lower, if not more than that. And like I said, it could be, in my case, 50 points lower. So, and again, that's going to depend on the intensity of the exercise and some other factors, the time of day, and of course, how much insulin on board you have and things like that. So, I think thinking ahead is really the critical thing for exercise.
It's a massive calculation. And I think is it safe to say that the approach that both of you have to this is almost like treat your type 1 as if it's a sport on top of your sport? It's very much from
Yes.
what I'm hearing, both of you, is you're talking about type 1 as if it is part of the event,
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah, it was
essentially it is.
funny. I was thinking about how to frame my upcoming study with the Boston Marathon, and I was actually running some ideas through ChatGPT and stuff like that, and it was like that was the first thing it came up with was the game inside the game. Essentially, there's two competitions here. One is to perform, the marathon, and the other is to maintain the glucose. And again, it's two things happening at the same time, which are both quite challenging.
I would also say too with you talking about looking at all this and studying it. One thing I've done a lot of is I'll take a screenshot of my pump app or the CGM app, and then I'll make notes on it on top of it. So after a run, or especially after a race, I'll make a bunch of notes. And I'll have like a photo album where I have all these stored. That's why it was so easy for me when doctors were like, "Hey, I want to see what you did in your race." I'm like, "I'll make a handout and then I'll bring that with me." And having the notes on top of it though, and I want to highlight you don't just do the highlight reel. Like it's really tempting to do that. Pick all the runs where it just went perfectly. And I know Joe follows me on Strava, and like I'll post when stuff goes wrong too, right? And that's actually where you learn the most about how to manage things is, that run you did at the end of the day when you had 1.5 units on board, insulin on board, and you're like, gosh, how am I going to start my, 7-mile run right now with all that insulin on board? Well, you're going to have to eat a lot more, and you're going to have to suspend your pump, and you're going to have to approach this much, much differently than a run in the morning where you're fasted, right? And you have no insulin on board. So I would say like, when working with patients and especially with like teenagers at diabetes camp, I think everybody's always afraid to fail, and I hate that word. Like you're not failing if you go low on a run or you go super high on a run. You are learning how to manage this. This is like exercise is the hardest variable to deal with, I think. Who knows? I haven't gone through menopause yet. Maybe that'll really kick me in the rear. But I just think approach it like a science experiment.
Mhm.
Study what's happening, make notes on it. Hopefully you're working with an endocrinologist and a diabetes educator that you can take this stuff into and show them this and say, hey, teach me how to do this differently. How can I approach this next time to make this so it doesn't happen? Right?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think people are afraid to. Yeah, and I don't wanna say the word fail, but they're afraid to fail because then you feel like you didn't accomplish what you were set out to do, and then you think to yourself, "Oh, I can't do this because I have type 1 diabetes," and then you start blaming the type 1 diabetes. But some of the biggest learning lessons I've had is when I've had to stop on a 10-mile run and call somebody to pick me up. And it was absolutely demoralizing, but then I went back, and it's kind of the study part of this is you look at what went wrong with your type 1 diabetes because I knew I could. I stopped at mile 10 while I was training for a marathon. I stopped at mile 10 on a 15-mile run, and I knew I could run the 15 miles, but I had to stop just because I was at 50 and I had 5 miles left to go. And I was like, I can't. I'm gonna run out of sugar if I go up and crash again, and I just gotta call it. Um, how how do you tell yourself like and obviously both of you work with a lot of kids and just people in general trying to accomplish stuff. How do you tell yourself to keep on moving on, to kind of take it as like this is an active study, even if you fail, look at what went wrong, and then how do you do it for the future? Because again, that was marathon training. I failed on a 15-mile run. All of a sudden the 26.2 even seemed more intimidating.
You want to take it, Lauren, or me?
Yeah, I've got an example for this one, and it's not me, although I've had multiple things. I mean,
Mm,
I think I rely heavily on community and my friends. I have so many friends with type 1 that are athletes, and I reach out to them and I tell them what happened, and they're like, "Oh, man," and they understand, right?
yep,
So
yep.
Sophie Shunk, is one of our athletes on DSP. She's phenomenal. She's my coach now. And then Casey Boren lives nearby here in Boise, and I talk to them all the time, um, almost every day, I would say. And, I was there when Sophie ran the Olympic trials in Orlando in February of 2024. She was on a sensor, but not on a pump at the time. And didn't have a perfect race day, not because of diabetes, but, she kept coming back and coming back to things. And recently she was third at Kodiak at UTMB's race. So now she's qualified for UTMB Mont Blanc in August, which is just amazing, right? So she is really competing on quite a high level, right? But she hadn't been on a pump. And in her last race, she was doing a 50, no, it's a 100K. It was a 100K, and she ended up going low at like mile 33 and had to drop out of the race. And Casey and I were crewing from afar. So we could see her Dexcom. We were following her. We were talking with her crew on site. Hey, let's get ahead of this. Let's do this. Let's do that. But we couldn't take away that long acting insulin. And that was really ultimately that got her in that race, and she went low. So now she's started on a pump, helping her through some of that. And I think there's this fear. Well, obviously, there's a fear now. She has this fear of going low in a race and having to drop out of a race because she goes low. And Joe, you'll back this up. Like you've seen in research studies that, what is it, like 60% of the population with type 1 is afraid to exercise because of going low. Something like that, right? Am I getting
Yeah.
that right?
Yeah, I mean, it's
I don't know.
just amazing how that fear is always there, and you just have to keep coming up with new strategies. And one thing I was going to mention is that, it's constantly changing. I mean,
Yeah.
my diabetes 10 years ago is nothing like my diabetes now, and it's nothing like it was 20 years ago. And my training is totally different, and everything is constantly changing. So just when you feel like you've gotten it figured out, it changes again, and it's extremely difficult. The strategy that I did 3 weeks ago to control my blood sugars during my marathon training, now it doesn't work because I'm more fit. My insulin sensitivity is different, and if I just do something simple like now I'm running in the afternoon, and before I was running in the morning, or now I'm running in the weekend, and all these things are constantly changing, and so just giving yourself sort of the grace to say like, look, it's not going to work every time, but if you stay persistent with it, if you acknowledge that it's not you, it's having diabetes, which is extremely challenging. It's exercising with diabetes, which is extremely challenging, and just continuing this conversation. What I want to do is keep this people understanding how hard this is. You know how when you tell somebody you have diabetes and they say, "Oh yeah, my brother has type 2 diabetes." And you're like, "Well, that's not anything like what I'm dealing with." It's the same thing where like, somebody could say, "Oh, you have an automated insulin delivery system. I bet it's super easy to control your blood sugars and stuff like that." Or doesn't that just do everything for you and stuff like that? Exercise is the thing that we just haven't figured out. There's so many variables. There's so many challenges, and the technology is just so limited in terms of what it can do in this situation. We have a gas pedal and we have no brakes. We can give lots of insulin, but we can't stop it. And we can stop it, but it's too late, way too late, hours too late that it stops. And so, I think that, getting that out there makes you feel less of a burden. Once you just sort of accept that like this is super hard and it's not your fault, we can think about it in a lot of different ways, and we can definitely do a lot better. But we just don't have the right insulin yet. We don't have the rapid acting insulin that works for 5 minutes and then is out of your system immediately. We don't have a CGM that in real time tells you what your blood glucose is. And so we don't have an artificial pancreas. If you get an islet cell transplant, now we're talking, and that's my dream, for people who exercise with type 1 diabetes is islet cell transplants, because again, this technology is unfortunately we're going to work with it. We're going to use CGM the best we can. We're going to adjust the settings on our AID systems. But until we have, islet cells that work, and sense glucose in an immediate way and are able to adjust insulin levels in the bloodstream, and again, not in the periphery, not in your subcutaneous fat, this exercise is going to be continually a challenge. So anytime I see somebody online and they post their blood sugars and they say, "Oh, I'm so great with type 1 diabetes and my A1C is 5 and I have this flat line all the time,"
Mhm.
the two things I think of is number one, you're not exercising because that would never happen if you were exercising. And two is you probably make a ton of insulin because that's the other thing with type 1 diabetes is that there's such a heterogeneous group of people with type 1 diabetes. Some people make zero insulin, and that is extremely much more difficult to control your blood sugars. And then some people, they have antibodies, they have an immune reaction, and they have, a slight decrease in insulin. But when you make a lot of insulin endogenously in your body, it makes you have a lot more buffer against high and low blood glucose levels, which is really important, especially when we're talking about low blood sugars with exercise. We have to remember that not only are we not making insulin for the most part, people with type 1 diabetes have very poor glucagon ability to secrete glucagon and react to glucagon, and and so that also impairs our ability to fight off low blood sugars during exercise.
I see a lot of reports of newly diagnosed people explaining how they go low while trying to exercise. And I think that is to your point of a honeymoon phase while you still have a lot of insulin um,
Yeah.
kind of releasing.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, again, they can go low, and
Yeah.
they do make a lot of insulin, but actually they're more protected against low blood sugars during exercise because they can actually suppress that. And so they're probably not on as much subcutaneous insulin at the same time as somebody who has, totally depleted their islet cells. And so they're while it may be difficult, it's probably going to get worse, unfortunately.
It has for me. I'm sure it has for all of us here.
Yeah.
I think you make a really great point how it's exciting what the technology is bringing, but there's a reason why we call it therapy methods, not a cure. They're all kind of band-aids. And the technology that is here, again, I just want to commend it for being really advanced, but it is not designed for an elite endurance athlete, let alone no, so it's not designed for the elite level. It's not designed for the athleticism level yet. It's designed for just trying to live with type 1 diabetes. I kind of want to backtrack and get a more simple question because all of us being athletes, sometimes I like to dive into the meat of the conversation. But really, Joe, directed to you. I mean, and this is could be at the basic level. You can go as in depth as you want about this. But why is activity, and you can say sports, but just activity in general, really important to do as a type 1 diabetic to control and see better glucose function? Even though, as you just explained, if you are active, you see a roller coaster. You're more apt to see those numbers go up and down, or it's harder to control. So at the end of the day, if somebody's not active and they hear that, they might get scared. But why, like, if you wanted to reel them back in, why is being active with type 1 diabetes actually really important at the end of the day?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think exercise is really a secret weapon. I mean, exercise for so many parts of the body. Whether it's your cardiovascular system, whether it's your muscles, whether it's your psychology, your mood. Exercise is honestly I think it's more important than almost anything else at longevity. I mean, you can just pull out studies left and right on just Google exercise and longevity, exercise and, muscle resistance exercise and all these different kinds of things. Um, with respect to type 1 diabetes in particular, obviously one of the challenges is that so many people with type 1 diabetes have insulin resistance as well. We have so many people with type 1 diabetes now on GLP-1s and medications to improve their metabolism because they have so much insulin resistance. They're taking insulin over many, many years. Insulin is an anabolic hormone which stores fat. Um, essentially when you take insulin, it allows glucose to come out of the bloodstream and be stored in your body as fat, and whether that's in the liver or in the muscle or the, but essentially you become more and more insulin resistant over time. And exercise is really the main tool that we have to overcome insulin resistance. Exercise and accompanying weight loss, and just improving insulin sensitivity at the level of the muscles. So. You know, my diabetes has not been perfectly controlled my whole life. I mean, I tell all my patients, when I was in college and when I was in high school, again, the last thing I really wanted to think about was my diabetes, and it was not well controlled. Um, but I'm very healthy, and I'm as healthier I think as I've ever been. Like I said, I'm as fast as I've ever been in terms of my performance and exercise, and I attribute that to just I've never had a period of time where I just stopped running or I stopped exercising or anything like that. And I really think that when you think about vascular or blood flow, making sure that your eyes and your kidneys and your feet are healthy, making sure that you're getting your body circulating. I attribute exercise to the majority of the reason for why I've been able to be as healthy as I have been. And now with the tools that we have, certainly it's become a lot easier for people to control their blood sugars as well. But again, 30 years ago, 35 years ago, finger stick meters, if that, injecting, 2 shots a day of mixed regular and NPH insulin. I mean, there was really no, unless you were the most meticulous person about your diet, and I certainly wasn't at that point. It was extremely difficult to have the A1Cs that we see routinely now. A1Cs in the sixes and even fives and things like that. It was very difficult back in the past.
And to your point, now directed to Lauren, how important is a diet both to type 1 diabetes and athleticism? Not to say not to enjoy life, because I mean, we all love ice cream, we all love treats and stuff, but both to the condition and to your athletic pursuits, how important is paying attention to what you put into your body is?
Yeah. Oh, it's so essential to blood glucose control. I used to tell patients, if you're dosing your insulin without actually counting your carbs and using a carbohydrate ratio, it's like you're playing darts with a blindfold on with your insulin dose. You're just throwing it out there. It's like it's never going to match up. And all we're trying to do with type 1 diabetes is we're trying to mimic what our pancreas would have been doing for us if it was making insulin, right? So I recently had an athlete I was talking to. She was just recently diagnosed like 2 years ago. And she has an endocrinologist, but she is on like a sliding scale for dosing. She's not on an insulin to carb ratio. She's not on a correction factor. And she's like an ultra runner. And this poor lady is eating like 15 grams of carbs at lunch because if she eats more than that with this fixed dose of insulin at lunch, she's going high. And I'm like, telling her, I'm like, you can eat. You should eat. You need to eat. Like, my goodness, you're running like 50 miles this weekend. You need to eat more. We have to fuel our bodies. We can't be afraid of insulin. Insulin is not, it's not a demon. It is so essential. And if I need, to cover lunch with whatever number of units, that's the number of units my body would have been making for me if it was still doing that for me. So, and if we're going to build muscle, we need to eat, we need to fuel. So I think sometimes when people with type 1 start out with exercise, their goal is, well, if I don't take any food while I'm eating any carbs, then I don't have to like worry about insulin dosage. I'll just disconnect from my pump and run. You're never going to perform well. You're never going to go fast if you don't fuel. So I couldn't be more passionate about that, right? Like I just like eat, fuel your body. And there were definitely times during my training where I was probably a little too lean and I wasn't fueling enough. And, comparing to like maybe 15 years ago, I probably weighed 10 pounds more and I'm 10 times faster. So, I think And it's not just women, I think, that tend to go too on the lean side. I see men do this too, sometimes going too lean, thinking that's what a runner looks like. No, a runner's gonna have a ton of muscle on their body and really be able to fuel well if they're gonna perform well. I can't emphasize that enough how important it is, and we've gotta match the insulin. If you can match the insulin, there's no food that's off the table that you can't eat. I used to always tell teenagers this because sometimes they got in their heads, like, we had a patient once that, was told he could never have soda again. Um, so he gave a boatload of insulin and then would drink his soda, right? And then eventually he went low because he gave too much. And I was like, you could drink the soda. It's not the best thing in the world for you as a dietitian. I don't want to see this as a big part of your diet. But if that is like your jam and you really want that, we can help you learn how to dose your insulin to cover that.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between what you're eating outside of athletics and like when you're gonna go run, right? And again, that's that whole insulin on board thing. Like it's one thing to have like to eat a lot of carbs, refuel, recharge, top up your glycogen stores, et cetera. Like in between, say a post race or post training thing, you want to take in a gram per kilogram of body weight of carbs, after your exercise and, some protein as well to sort of refuel your glycogen stores. And that can also prevent you from having hypoglycemia overnight after particularly difficult exercise because your body overnight is going to be kind of sucking up that glucose to try to fill up your glycogen stores again. And but if you've already sort of topped it off right after exercise, you don't have as much risk of hypoglycemia overnight. So that can be really helpful. But then by the same token, you don't want to 2 hours before you go on a 2-hour run, eat 80 grams of carbs and take 8 units of insulin or whatever and have so much insulin on board. So that's where it becomes challenging is like, how do you dose insulin in general to maintain good glucose control and fueling and strength. But then when you're going to go exercise, how do you adjust so that your blood sugars before exercise are not too high or not too low, right? Because again, if they're too high before exercise, you're gonna, especially on an AID system, you're gonna have too much insulin going. Obviously, you don't want them too low before exercise. At least 125 is generally recommended. And then during exercise, again, how that's all going in and after. So I always say that, you've got these different time periods that you have to really be aware of. And the typical challenges that people have is that, they might start out too high prior to exercise because they're nervous, and then they drop low during exercise. And then a lot of people have this big rebound right after exercise, and then they're really high because they still have adrenaline, but they have low glucose uptake in the muscle. So then they're really high. And then they say, oh my God, I'm so high. And then they give a bunch of insulin, and then they crash because they still have the insulin sensitivity from the exercise for the next 24 hours. So then you have a crash, and then you treat that, and then maybe you go on a roller coaster for a little while, and then you go low overnight again. So that's why I'm saying exercise, there's at least 5 different points like surrounding one episode of exercise that can make you too high or too low. And that's why, it's very difficult to achieve that sort of flat line when you're doing regular exercise.
And it seems like it goes back whether it's a meal before the performance, a meal after. It's all about timing with when you eat, timing with when you give insulin in respect to the performance. Even you mentioned you don't want insulin on board. Can you explain a little to our audience of like why you don't want insulin on board while performing? For me, I'll just give the personal anecdote of if I have insulin on board while I'm exercising, my insulin kind of acts double fast, and then I get into a loop. And even though it's insulin that may cover the certain amount of carbs, the insulin hits before the carbs hit, and I experience a low.
Yeah. I mean, I think you always have to have the caveat. It depends what type of exercise you're doing. Again,
Yeah,
we're talking
yeah.
about generally aerobic
Tends to be like
exercise
cardio
that will
and yeah.
drop your blood sugars. But essentially to what Lauren said earlier, we're trying to mimic the pancreas. We're trying to do what the body does under normal physiology in somebody whose physiology is completely disrupted, right? I mean, there's no insulin production. And so Essentially we have to say, well, and again, I'm not an exercise physiologist, but what does the body normally do when you start to exercise? Well, it reduces insulin, right? And it mobilizes glucose from the liver and the muscle so that you can have enough glucose in order to be able to exercise. And, what's the problem when you have type 1 diabetes is that you have circulating insulin that can't be shut off. You have circulating insulin that lasts 4 to 6 hours, if not longer, if you're on basal insulin. And so, in terms of mimicking normal physiology in someone with type 1 diabetes, when you're exercising, it's almost impossible. And so, again, insulin on board is what's often considered sort of the culprit in hypoglycemia. And this is a big area of interest for me right now because I think that everyone's concept of insulin on board is really messed up. It really is just whatever the pump company wants to tell you that it is. But, that doesn't make any sense because, Medtronic or a certain pump company might say, your insulin lasts for 2 hours. Well, we know that insulin doesn't last for 2 hours. Insulin lasts for 4 hours or 6 hours or even longer, depending on the dose of the insulin. So really insulin on board, and I'm working on this with a colleague of mine, should be reported also in relation to your body size and the amount of insulin that you gave. I think there's a lot of misconceptions. Like if you're on a pump that has a duration of insulin action or active insulin time of 2 hours, a lot of times you'll see, oh, I have zero insulin on board. When you gave a bolus 2 hours ago, 6 units, right? There's a ton of that insulin that's in your system. So that's actually insulin on board. The other thing is that insulin on board, oftentimes in the way that the pump companies display it to you, doesn't include basal insulin and doesn't include basal insulin adjustments, whereas many of these pumps ramp up your basal insulin quite a bit when your blood sugars are above target, and that target might be 100 or 110 or a range, and so it can be very misleading. Although it's very helpful to think about insulin on board and the risks of insulin on board as being what drives lows, a lot of times it's an underestimate of your actual risk, depending on how much you've set your active insulin time to. So, what might be the optimal settings for a sedentary condition might not be optimal for exercise. And so I think in the medical field right now and in this, we're debating, how should we represent this differently? Are there different ways of reporting insulin on board that would be more accurate in terms and more informative and more educational so that people fully understand their risks of exercising?
Mm-hmm. And then they could take the action, say if they need to eat more before exercising or they need to eat less, given the knowledge, again, is given the tool to make a decision based off that factor.
Yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
it's also good to remember like the, onset, peak, and duration of your insulin, right? So typically insulin's going to start working in about 15 minutes, peak in about an hour to an hour and a half, and then slowly trail out of the body. So between that 3 to 5 hour mark, you still got some insulin working, but it's a very small amount by that time, but not insignificant, right?
Nope.
So
Enough to drop.
especially like Joe was saying, like depending on the dose of the insulin. So this is a big reason why before, big race, we're gonna wake up, gosh, maybe 4 hours before the race to have a big meal so that we can eat that meal and make sure that insulin is out of the body. I've also worked with some athletes before that are using like the inhaled insulin, like Afrezza, because that gets out of the body much faster, right? I've also personally tried, even though it's off label, I've tried microdosing glucagon, like an injectable glucagon in the middle of a long run to see how that would function. So,
How did that go?
it was okay. It kind of stung. I probably needed to give more.
Yeah,
Um,
glucagon is infamous for nausea and things that you don't necessarily want
Yeah.
during exercise as
Right.
well.
While running.
well, I gave it at mile 10 of a 20-mile trail run, and I was fine. And it definitely did stabilize me for the last 10 miles. But I don't know if like I really needed that. Like I do well with my adjusting my pump and eating throughout. But I always like to just play with tools that whatever's out there, I want to try it. I want to do it.
I have one more major topic before we get onto the Diabetes Sports Project. And that is we're talking a lot about eating food, but what goes hand in hand with eating is hydration. As type 1 diabetics, especially, and we can start with you, Lauren, for the fact of running and, like you said, trail running too, how important is hydration, but then what kind of hydration are you looking for as a type 1 diabetic? If your blood sugars are high, obviously that dehydrates you as a diabetic, but even more than just drinking water, it seems like we want electrolytes. What type of electrolytes? So what do you do, and what is your mindset when it comes to hydration?
Yeah, so last year at Boston, I wore a Nix hydration sensor, and that was really interesting. I wore it during training, and then I wore it in the race, and it analyzed, sweat rate, sodium loss. And it would actually analyze and look and see what was the best sports drink based on all those parameters. I can't remember them all now. But basically, what I learned, which I probably already knew before wearing the sensor, was dang it, Lauren, you're not drinking enough, right? And not only is that bad for performance, it's also bad for performance of our sensors. So the number one cause I would say of getting a sensor error while you're running is you're not hydrated enough. Right. I also saw this at Dexcom. I was working with a nurse that was working 12-hour shifts. And every time during her shift, her sensor would stop working. She'd get sensor errors and she was very upset. And I go, what do you do for work? She's like, nurse, I'm working. I was like, so are you drinking when you're working? She's like, gosh, no, Lauren, I can't drink when I work. Then I'd have to go to the bathroom. I'm like, well, that's why your sensor's not working. But she didn't want to be inconvenienced by having to go to the bathroom when she was, on the floor. So anyway, so hydration, my game plan during racing, I don't carry anything when I'm racing, like a marathon. Trail racing, I've got a vest on and I'm drinking. And during a long training run, I'll wear a vest and I'll have one bottle that has just plain water or sometimes an electrolyte mix that has no carbs, and then one that has carbs. And I'll alternate between them as I'm going along, or I'll rely on one more than the other depending on where my glucose is. So, yeah, hydration's essential. The first Boston I did, I was so focused on my blood sugar, and it was such a different race. It's so crowded and everybody's good. You're getting passed by old ladies. That's my goal, by the way. I want to be that old lady, passing people. And you're just like, oh my gosh, everybody's so good around you. And I was so focused on that and on my blood sugars, I wasn't getting over to get to all the water stops. And I got dehydrated. My blood sugar was great the whole race, but I needed an IV at the finish because I was so dehydrated. I'm like, gosh, you're such an idiot. How did that happen?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Just understanding the sweat rate is really interesting. And they do all these things you can weigh yourself before and weigh yourself after, and then calculate your sweat rate and all this different kinds of stuff. I can tell you, I have a high sweat rate. I don't know what the number is, but it's very high. I could lose 8 pounds in a training run, and I am weak and about to pass out, lightheaded, dizzy, stuff like that. And you go on these training runs, unless you bring something with you. It's not like somebody's passing out, cups of water. It's very difficult to stay hydrated without bringing something with you. The good thing about the marathons and the races like this is, every mile they've got an offering, and definitely the main thing is you have to take it even if you don't feel thirsty. And that's always the science of it, is that, the thirst mechanism is such that by the time you feel thirsty, you're way dehydrated. And so you need to drink water even when you're not. And ultimately, it's going to affect performance. If you're dehydrated, you're going to cramp and you're going to struggle. And especially in those later miles. And of course, when you're running the marathon, it's miles 0 through 20, and then it's 20 and beyond. And that's where, you'll see everybody's Strava, and it all looks good. And then it's just like the last 6 miles. And so, and you can tell who's hydrated and who's not, and who's trained and who's not. And so, but yeah, I definitely think that hydration is critical. And, how much should you do electrolytes versus how much should you do? It's very difficult to find exact numbers on those things. And some people's goos, or their gels, their energy gels with carbs, they also have electrolytes. Some don't, and so you have to sort of weigh those things in, and ultimately train like you want to do the race. So practice, try the things, the circumstances as much as possible. Of course, it's difficult when your training phase has totally different weather than the performance phase. Like I remember training for Chicago all summer long. You're training for Chicago, and then all of a sudden it's 50 degrees, and so you were training in 90-degree temperatures, and that's one thing, and then now it's 50. Um, so you have to factor that in. But I think that, if you talk to a lot of marathoners, that's always something that hits everybody at some point where they realize, wow, I'm not drinking enough water at all. And everybody has a bad event, or everybody has a bad race that they probably attribute to hydration status.
And even
But
just so like what I do in the morning, so even off performance days, every morning I wake up, I get a little bit of Himalayan salt, drop it in a glass of, I think it's like a 16-ounce glass of water, squeeze some lemon in it. And just that alone, s- it doesn't completely reduce my cortisol feet to floor effect of the spike happening in the morning, but it reduces it enough to where now I'm able to eat breakfast, and I don't get like when I was first diagnosed, I'd get a massive spike as soon as I woke up. Now I'm eating breakfast before that spike hits, and that's due to just being hydrated right away first thing in the morning.
Nice. That's good.
other thing you can do too, I mean, yes, there are hydration sensors. They're quite interesting, but yeah, the weighing yourself and then just looking at the
Mhm.
color of your pee, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're getting some dark pee or you're just not peeing enough throughout the day, like that's you're dehydrated.
Yeah.
I envision one day to have like a full, and I know companies are working on this, just to have a full encompassing health status thing that can tell you if you're hydrated right now, what your blood sugar's at, what your blood pressure's at, what your pulse is at, pulse ox, like everything just at once, and you could just like at any second look at a health metric. But then again, we might be going crazy if we were constantly to look at that and not
You know,
enjoy life as much.
the other metric I would say that, people with type 1 or without should be looking at is how you're sleeping. And
Yeah.
actually, if you're not sleeping well, that also affects your glucose.
Mhm.
And that's when we recover. So part of my marathon training is being like religious about when I go to bed and trying to get that really good deep sleep and having enough sleep.
Yeah, that's a good.
You follow like a routine and make sure that you're wind down and able to sleep?
My husband's better at this than I am. So he makes me a cup of tea and he like actually he's even more about it than I am. I'd probably be up late at night watching things and doing all kinds of stuff.
Yeah,
And he's
yeah.
like, lights are down, night lights are on, like we're easing into the evening. So he's actually the most helpful with that.
But that's absolutely true. Yeah, sleep. I mean, and again, you could say one thing and then do another thing. Um, I absolutely believe that sleep is critical. I do a terrible job. I have 7 kids. My wife is amazing, and we just try to make it through each day, and sometimes sleep is not part of it, um, but uh, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, the difference, and you can track all these metrics on your Garmin and stuff like that, your sleep score, your body battery, your HRV, and all this different kinds of stuff, and it gives you a good sense, and you can tell if I'm recovering or I'm not recovering, and I do use that information quite a bit. Again, just like a lot of people. I don't always listen to the Garmin when it tells me to recover and things like that, but it's pretty dead on, when it can tell when I'm pushing burning the candle at both ends.
And you get the stress alert, and it's like, you need to calm down, and you're just sitting in your chair, and you're like, "I'm doing nothing."
Or the
Shows that you've been
unproductive, like you're
overactive.
like unproductive, so
Yeah.
judgy, you know.
Yeah.
Overtraining,
Uh,
unproductive.
yeah.
Those are all my
Yeah.
I think I've been overtraining for the past year according to Garmin.
detraining. I mean, they have so many different words for the same. Yeah. I've been detraining, overtraining, unproductive, and sort of like, yeah.
we're kind of harshing on Garmin. We love Garmin. One of the things I love most about Garmin, and we talk about longevity and whatnot, is you can go in and you can see your VO2 max, and then you can see your age based on your VO2 max, like number. So when I go to see my doctor, my poor doctors, I'm sure they're like, oh gosh, here comes Lauren. Um, but I'm like, we're just going to go based on my Garmin age. My Garmin says I'm like 35 years old. So there you go. Right.
But a lot of that goes back to recovery too, and all those numbers get better when you take the time, get your sleep, recover.
Yeah.
It's gonna reward you in terms of how it's gonna evaluate you because, again, your heart rate's gonna be low. So many of these metrics are just based on heart rate and, stuff like that, and so, as long as you can maintain that, it gives you credit for sort of being better recovered.
The over-encompassing theme seems to be your health, especially in regards to type 1 diabetes. Is not just about the numbers of type 1 diabetes, it's about all the other metrics. Be as healthy as you possibly can be with other aspects in life that can only help benefit your type 1 management.
Yeah.
Yeah. And find the joy. There should be a joy
Yeah.
meter somewhere. Like I'm always happiest when I'm training and running, even if the workouts are hard. Actually, even more so when the workouts are hard. When I have a hard workout, maybe I've had a stressful work week, I've had something come up with my family that's challenging, and then I go and I just crush a workout. I'm like, yes, yes, I'm in control of that. You're not in control of everything else. Even with diabetes, right? We can't control diabetes 24/7 and be perfect with it, but I know I can get out and run and have a good run.
Yeah.
Speaking of training, possibly overtraining, and running, let's dive into the Diabetes Sports Project. I'd love to first ask, we'll start with you, Lauren, and then we'll go to you, Joe, about what is the Diabetes Sports Project? What is your role with the Diabetes Sports Project? You were mentioning a little bit about what's upcoming with Boston. So what do you see on the horizon in the near future, but also what's the over-encompassing vision of what you're trying to build?
Yeah, so Casey Boren and Eric Tozer co-founded Diabetes Sports Project back in 2015. They were both also athletes on Team Novo Nordisk, as was I. I came on board in 2018. I'm the director of education and social media and helping with the Boston project with the athletes are doing that. Um, we have a decent sized group, I would say. I think one of our biggest challenges that we're faced with right now is finding funding. We're pretty grassroots. And what we'd really like to see is to have a sponsor so that we can build this more and we can be in the community and serve the community more, doing things with other athletes with type 1 and serving that community, but also going back in and working with endocrinologists and helping. I think we've got exercise guidelines that are out there. We've got amazing research. Thank you, Joe, and other people that are in the world. But I think what's kind of missing is breaking those guidelines down and making them understandable to people. And I think there's just such a huge, powerful thing about storytelling. When I ran my first marathon in 2001, I was in college. I was running cross country. My mom thought I was nuts. She's like, "Can you just go to the gym like a normal person?" I'm like, "No, absolutely not. I want to go do this." And it was so hard. But I looked, and this was just about the time the internet was starting to be available. But I looked up and I saw that Missy Foy was the first female to qualify for the Olympic trials for the marathon. I had no dreams of the Olympics, but I was just like, oh, there's a person with type 1. She did it. I can do it. And I think that message is more out there now, but we need to continue to push it. And I want to showcase athletes with type 1 that are pushing the limits, that are setting big goals. And I want to share those stories, not just the highlight reel, the struggles too, the hard stuff that's happened and what they've overcome to get where they are.
Really inspiring. And as somebody who's trying to do the same mission, a very similar mission, I think it's extremely important. And the sentiment is shared.
Yeah, I think the Diabetes Sports Project has been, pivotal for me. I mean, I think I've always been involved with diabetes advocacy groups and Breakthrough T1D and all these ADA, and I remember I've been working at this marathon thing for a long time, and when Lauren reached out to join this in 2024, I had never run a Boston Marathon qualifying time. I had never really achieved this, and she said, look, we're going to get people together. We're going to have community, and that's exactly what she is saying is that the community is so valuable to inspire, inspire each other, inspire people who aren't. In our group, but even inspire our own athletes, and so for me to be able to do this, and to in 2024, again, break my PR by 20 minutes, qualify for Boston, at the age of 48, it's just been amazing. And the more I talk about it with other people with type 1 diabetes, they get excited, they get inspired. All my patients with type 1 diabetes, I say, look, I've been living with type 1 diabetes for 35 years. I'm still running. I'm still training for Boston Marathon. And for all these other people who have told them throughout their whole lives, like you're going to go blind, you're going to have kidney failure, you're going to have neuropathy, you're not going to have any quality of life. And for me to sort of help inspire them to say, look, I'm living my best life at this age, still going, still getting better, still learning. But then at the same time, like Lauren said, life isn't perfect. I go through the same struggles. I tell my patients all the time, your A1C is better than mine. I wish I had your A1C, and so, I'm not special. I'm not unique. I'm not anything. I'm just like you can be. You can be like me. I could be like you. We're in the same situation. We just have type 1 diabetes and we're just trying to make it through life and do the best that we can. And, I think that part of this study that I'm starting now is we want to run our team in the Diabetes Sports Project team at the Boston Marathon in 2026, and we want to just study it. We want to say, how did we do? What do we know? What do we not know? It's like you said, we're not going to nail it. We're not going to do perfect, and that's what I'm looking forward to is to show people we haven't gotten it all figured out yet. We're probably going to have 10 people run, 2 people might drop out. 2 people, might set a PR, and a bunch of people might have kind of up and down races. We don't really know what's going to happen. Everybody's using different technology. Everybody's got different strategies, and it hasn't ever been done before. We've never studied type 1 diabetes Boston Marathon qualifiers before. One of the things we want to do is compare people who have qualified for Boston who are running with type 1 and maybe get some people who are running with type 1 who haven't qualified. Maybe there's different physiology that we can understand between qualifiers and non-qualifiers, maybe charity runners. And then also just, again, put some CGM on people who don't have diabetes just to use as kind of a comparison and a control group. So I think this whole thing is just, getting it out there, understanding that, we're learning a lot, but there's a lot we don't know at the same time. And I think that getting people involved and engaged and inspired and just thinking, maybe this is something I want to do in my life. Maybe I want to contribute to it. And so maybe there's young people who hear about this and the Diabetes Sports Project that this becomes their passion. There's this idea that, things that are really hard to do, if you don't care about it, it's just a struggle. But if you care about it, it's your passion. And so, I think we want to inspire passion in people, especially people with type 1 diabetes and advocates. And so I think I'm really excited for it. It's coming up very soon. We only have, 6 or 7 weeks to train, and I'm counting the number of big long runs I have left, and I'm hoping that no severe injury comes up between now and then. So, but yeah, I'm really excited.
It's both of you have just stated a mission that, again, and I say the word important, but it really is extremely important. And just to get that message out there. And from the description, Joe, I'm realizing that we're only scratching the surface, and we have to return after the study to have a full another podcast episode just on the study, because you got me hooked. I'm just as intrigued as you are to find out, because type 1 is such an individualized condition. What happens when you look at so many different variables within type 1 doing the same event. So that's going to be cool just to look at those numbers. Even I know it'll draw to some conclusions, but just to, like, at first just watch all the different numbers and just analyze it. As somebody who likes reading that stuff, that's good. That's going to be so cool.
Good.
I'm gonna provide the audience how to follow DSP, how to follow both of you, provide the links and everything within the show note captions. Again, obviously, I want to thank you very much for coming on, but I want to leave with one last impression for both of you for people, and we touched on it a lot. It's big with mindset with type 1. For those who haven't gone after it yet because of fear, whether that person was diagnosed at 5 years old, 20 years old, or a type 1 diagnosed at 40 years old, wants to go for a 1 mile run, a half marathon, or a full marathon, what is one piece of advice, either related to mindset, related to technique of running or eating or just diabetes management? If you could just, it doesn't have to be a huge piece of advice, but one piece of advice that you would give a person. We can start with you, Joe, and then end with Lauren.
Just like anything else, just take that first step, just get out there and do it and learn from it. And again, you might fall on your face, but again, that's a learning experience that I think we've all had. And the way to build a habit is just to do something, repeatedly. And I think that, nobody's good at anything the first time that they do it. But if you keep doing it, and then at first you're like, wow, I'm still not good at this, and you look back a month later, and then you say, well, I'm not as good as this guy, and then you look back three months later and you say, wow, I'm getting pretty good, and I'm better than your average. And not that you're comparing yourself to people, but when you look back in the rearview mirror is really when you realize how much consistency pays off. And I think that again, it's not kind of where you start, it's where you finish. And I think that, and again, not that the finish is the key is the journey. And I think going through it, growing, becoming a better person is what it's all about.
I love that. I think that's very well said, Joe. I would add to it, find your community, build your community. And this doesn't have to necessarily be other people with type 1, although that's super helpful. Anybody that I've run with over the years you got a lot of time when you're running to talk. So anybody I've run with over the years, I feel like has become an expert on type 1 because they had to listen to me tell them about it. But, create that community for yourself. If you can find other type 1s, great. But if you can just find somebody to run with, it makes you more accountable. And tell someone your goal. Maybe it's like, hey, I've never run a 5K. I want to run a 5K. I knew a guy in Florida. He's run a marathon in every state now, but he started on a couch to 5K coaching program. He also has type 1. And now he's run all these marathons. He's run Boston. He's done all kinds of stuff. So also don't set a ceiling for yourself. I've actually done this for myself. And, and Casey and Sophie have helped me crush that ceiling and make big goals. Because I think at the end of the day, like, I don't want to regret not going all in. Right? We all have that opportunity. If you're passionate about something, if you care about something, go all in, find the resources, find your people, find your community, and learn how to do it. There's nothing that needs to hold you back. Please, please, please don't ever have diabetes hold you back. Yes, it's hard. But hard is kind of fun. I've told my kids this. Like they do all kinds of sports. They've done hockey and hunting and skiing. And my youngest just tried jujitsu, and he competed last week. And for the first time, he totally got clobbered. It was terrible. And he was kind of demoralized after. And I was like, but you wouldn't like this if it was easy. And he smiled and he's like, you're right, Mom. I was like, yeah, all the things that I've done that have been hard are the things that I'm most proud of, that make me the most happy if it's hard. Diabetes is hard. Running marathons is really hard. You combine them, it's really, really hard. But my goodness, you cross that finish line. And Joe, when you cross that finish line on April 20th, nothing in the world compares to that feeling. Crossing the finish line at Boston, mic drop. It's amazing. It's amazing.
I always have the phrase that discipline leads to freedom. But I'd like to add to that, based off what you both said, is discipline and adversity can lead you to freedom. So I really like that.
That's
Very
great.
true.
And you can pause a podcast, but you can't pause somebody running next to you. So that's also great advice. Once you start running, you're stuck with them, which is ultimately good because it might be what you need in that moment.
Or you just got to go faster.
Yeah, that's true. Push yourself harder. Well, once again, Lauren and Joe, thank you both very much. I appreciate the knowledge, the professionalism, the expertise, the enthusiasm, and the motivation that you brought to the table today. I know our audience will greatly appreciate it. And like I stated a little while ago, we're only scratching the surface. So I'd love to, in the future, continue these conversations. My hope is one day to organize an in-person podcast, but for now, we'll utilize technology like we do with our type 1 diabetes to get the podcasts wherever we are in the country and in the globe. So just a massive appreciation and thank you again.
Thank you.
God, we do it.
Thank you, Joe and Lauren, for sharing your incredible clinical expertise and your personal dedication to the T1D community. Your work with the Diabetes Sports Project is a powerful reminder that with the right management and a relentless mindset, there truly are no limits to what we can achieve on the course, in the clinic, or in life. You can follow the mission and see the athletes in action at diabetessportsproject.com or on their social media at Diabetes Sports Project, where you can reach out to Lauren directly. You can catch up on Dr. Henske's research with the links in the show note captions. And stay tuned as we plan to create a documentary on the upcoming research and event of this year's Boston Marathon, with T1D athletes running in the age range from the young 20s to the 60s. We are excited to be part of this project. For all our content, please visit t1determined.net. Connect with us on social media. Find us on Instagram, TikTok, and X at T1D_endurance, and Facebook at T1Determined. Until next time, keep pushing your limits. I hope this helps. Stay strong, stay determined. T1 Determined.